Okay, welcome back. This is time for Constellation episode 5, 5 Miles Out. The sound is the clearest. This one is also written by Peter Harness, also directed by Oliver Hirschspiegel. Um, it's a fairly more straightforward episode in terms of plot as some of our past ones. After injuring Magnus at the end of episode 4, Joe takes Alice, and it's basically a road trip the rest of the episode as they make their way to the cabins and some of the scenes that we think we saw in the first couple of episodes of the series. Joe makes a stop and steals the Cal device, which we need to talk about their security around what's probably a tens of $1 million piece of technology. She enlists Elliot, help her track down some astronaut medical records. She visits the Skagerrak Marine Observatory in Denmark and learns about their ghost tapes. She talks to Alice about what she really is fearful of, which ends up being the Valia vision of a dead cosmonaut. And then she hears proof on the tapes of Irina, who may or may not be the Valia, dying in space. Henry struggles with Bud after the cow goes missing, as Bud is trying to break into his reality and becoming more and more aggressive as he does so. At the end of the episode, at the cabin where Joe and Alice have found themselves, Joe hears Alice's voice, both in the cabin, both on the tapes that the observatory had of her in space, but the Alice who is there with her says that that is not her. Okay, so we got some probably
Yeah.
a narrower group of plot or plot points than we've had in previous episodes, but a lot of pieces within that. Should we start with this trip, sort of how they end up at the cabin? This cabin sort of refers back to the end of the first few episodes. Should we just sort of go beat by beat on their trip after she takes
I
Alice?
don't know. I mean, the cabin, yeah, it's a question ultimately because it does feel like that lines up in a certain way, but then I think it's ultimately a question as I kind of thought it through. It's one of those things as I was writing my article for the week. At first, I thought, oh, well, it loops back around,
Hmm.
and then as I got into it, I started thinking, like, wait a minute, I'm not sure it quite does.
These scenes are not exactly what we saw in the first two episodes.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, here when they're arriving to the cabin, you get this fork in the road, and Joe thinks, well, there's not supposed to be one, and she decides to drive over the lake. Which, oh my God, please, if I'm ever in the car, don't do something like this. Um, we didn't like we don't know for sure that that didn't happen
Yeah.
back in episode 1. I went back and rewatched these scenes, but you don't see it happen. It doesn't kind of feel like it. When they arrived in episode 1, then it was like Alice is going to bed and she gives her the story on the iPad, and you don't see you don't see anything repeated here. So it becomes a question of does this fit together? Are we supposed to be thinking that it's the same reality? And at the
I
end
was
of the
gonna
day, I'm not
ask, I was
entirely
gonna
sure.
ask you about that because in your rewatch, one of the things that you've even mentioned this to me before, sort of watch what people are wearing. Is Alice wearing the same pajamas that she was wearing when she goes to bed in episode 1, right? Or is it like she's just in her clothes that they took the car trip in? That's one thing I'd be curious to know. I just didn't know if you picked up on that.
I don't have the definitive answer.
You
I have
know,
to go
you're not
back
on
and check.
pajama watch.
I can follow up on the paintings.
Yes.
And I don't know if you
Mm,
saw this. We published an article. I wrote up a little article we published yesterday.
I did read this today. This is very
Um,
interesting to me.
we'd already talked about the information in the article anyway. I just thought, you know what, I'm going to take the time and put this together. Maybe it's of interest to people. So that at the end of episode 4, you had the poor devil. I'm just going to call it the poor devil. um, that really they call their attention to. I went back. Listeners last week maybe would have heard me say, like, I think maybe that used to be a different painting, and I hadn't checked
Yep.
yet. I went back and checked, and yes, right. So when they arrive at the cabin in episode 1, it's a different Hugo Simberg painting. It's the same
Mhm.
artist, but it is what is widely regarded to be his most famous painting, The Wounded Angel, which also happens to be the name of Constellation episode 1. All right, we can know that. You do see it in the background some other times, episode 2 and things like that. But the most interesting thing I discovered was that at the end of episode 1, when she goes to the quote unquote other cabin,
Mhm.
The painting on the wall seems like it is a mix of these two paintings.
Yeah.
It's like the wounded angel, but instead of a wounded angel, it's a poor devil being carried on that.
So this is, I mean, yes, please go read this piece on the site. Cameron does a great job breaking down what we have seen and what potentially it could mean, and also what it could open up for interpretation later. But this idea of, okay, we got two famous paintings from Hugo Simberg. Obviously, this is not, this clearly we're past well past the point of coincidence of this thing. So these certainly are there for a reason. They mean something. But this painting that apparently doesn't exist, but is a
Yeah.
combination of both the angel and the devil, it was very interesting to me, and I think really hits on the theme of this episode, right? So in Christian tradition, devil was an angel, is a fallen angel, right? So it's sort of this same thing but in different places, same thing but in different perspectives, you could almost say, right? Even from the, I've got the angel and the demon on my shoulder when I'm thinking about decisions that I have to make. Sort of this
Mm-hmm.
idea of, as we referenced at the beginning, liminal spaces. You're in something that's between two places that you need to go. We talked about how Joe plows through over the lake because she can't decide which of the two roads to take. So she takes neither. She just goes through and makes her own path. We've got these, obviously the Henry Bud piece that we're going to talk about. We've referenced Schrodinger's cat here in previous episodes. And then this quote when Henry is talking to Irina earlier in the episode, they're talking about the cowl device. And she says to him, what happens to one of the particles in an entangled pair determines what happens to the other, even if they are far apart.
Yeah.
And they talk about the idea of liminal spaces. And so we're clearly dealing with something where it's not just separate dimensions, realities, universes, but these things are starting to blur. And we need to figure out why that's happening, particularly with Henry and Bud, particularly with two Alices, particularly with what's happened with Irina, what's happened with Joe. So we're starting to get a sense of what the theme is here they're trying to take us towards.
Yeah, so quantum entanglement, it would be
Right.
the term. There's a real thing with regard to electrons. Once again, though, I think that Constellation is taking it to a macro level with regard to people,
Yes.
basically, is how it's being invoked. So if you follow that line, again, it's weird to say some things make more sense than others when I am about to start saying things like one version died in space and another one didn't. Like that makes sense.
Yeah.
But that's the feeling I get, right? You have the version of Irina who died in space. There's pretty good evidence that a version of Joe died in space. I think there's decent evidence that a version of Henry died in space. There's the
Mhm.
fact that on Henry's whiteboard it said death in space,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Based on Alice's vision, there's a version of Henry who died in space and a version who didn't. Right. So we got
um,
some of this sort of both, yeah, these both sets. The Henry Bud one we need in a minute, we need to revisit because I don't quite understand that and we need to talk about it. But anyway, sort of
no, yeah, yeah,
don't
yeah.
mean to sidetrack us.
No, the details there feel a little bit different.
Hmm.
Maybe we just don't have all the information yet with regard to Joe. That's one of my questions with going to where we started. Do these cabin scenes line up?
Yeah.
Because if they don't, the implication potentially would be that we're now actually seeing another version of Joe, where I presume basically through the first four episodes at least, that we were always with quote unquote our Joe.
Yeah. So there was this, I guess that something needs to be determined. Were we always with our Joe or were we always in our timeline? That's the one that we started with, right? Sort of which one did we
Uh-huh.
end up with after the incident on the ISS?
Well, so I can provide some answers to that, I think. We have not all so when we started out the
Yeah.
show and we were seeing Magnus and Alice, that Magnus and that Alice were matched to who I would call our Joe, the one that we've been following.
Okay.
How do we know this? Well, if nothing else, Alice speaks Swedish and calls her mama, right? So this other Alice doesn't speak Swedish and doesn't call her mama, which I thought was a kind
Mm-hmm.
of a powerful ending to the episode.
Very.
But I hadn't really clocked the mama mommy thing before. She calls her mommy, not mama, right?
Yeah.
But that is something that I think you could use to say, well, okay, which Alice is it? And by implication, like which reality are we in?
Yeah. Yeah. If there was a way to sort of parse, yeah, which Alice or Alice is saying which things, embodying which things can do certain things, do we know which is which? But then that leads me to, again, to the same question really I have about Henry and Bud, but on a deeper level about Alice. How can there possibly be two Alices in the same place?
Yeah,
Or is where they are in this cabin, or is the device that they're with something that is blending or separating or interweaving these realities together for Joe, that she's seeing Alice, eh, both versions of Alice.
yeah, and let's take Alice first because that's primarily where we've been, and then we'll
Hmm.
move to Henry and Bud. I do. How to even pose the question? Um, one of the things we were talking about last week was um, how could Alice possibly have this vision, if you will,
Yeah,
of Joe's memorial? She didn't die in space. She didn't go to space.
exactly.
And after we recorded, I had this thought that I shared with you. Well, okay, well, if it's that the Joe, her Joe in her world died in space, that somehow she's piercing the veil of the weirdness and seeing what her
Yeah,
reality, quote unquote, should be like.
yeah,
That might make some sense, but it doesn't resolve all the weirdness in the cabin scenes with the two Alices.
yeah. It would make sense to me that okay, I guess Joe in the timeline, or Alice in the timeline where Joe died, but that Joe has moved over to another timeline, can sense these different realities because her mother opened them. That would be one thing, right? But then it almost is like these Alice's exist in the same place. And that's what I'm having trouble wrapping my head around.
Same. Yeah, completely. Right.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, another possibility is we get the replay of this in this episode towards the end. What Joe is playing back is footage of when Paul activated the Cal device on the ISS, and in that moment, Joe was talking to Alice remotely. Maybe that's relevant somehow to Alice's experience, action at a distance, right? That's the whole thing. Quantum mechanics is so weird. Quantum entanglement is a spooky action at a distance. Um, so maybe something like that, but beyond
And,
this,
and
go
to
ahead.
say the very last scene of this episode where we see the Swedish speaking mama saying version of Alice, we don't explicitly know that she's in the same cabin location as the mummy Alice and the Joe that we're seeing throughout the episode, right? We just sort of, I guess, are led to believe that because she's hearing it, Joe's hearing it, but we don't know that.
And let me say this, whether she is or not, right? Because I think really probably where we should be going is back to notions of liminality and
Hmm.
the in between, and the worlds are bleeding into one another and we can't make hard and fast distinctions. What is she doing out there?
Yeah, I have no idea. Yeah.
I mean, and you could line that up with the Alice that Joe finds in the cupboard at the end of episode one,
Hmm.
right? Who also says "Mama."
Yep, that's right.
Um, when Joe gets to that cabin, the cabin is cold. It's icy. I believe there's a dead cat in it for some reason, which
Schrodinger's
maybe
cat?
Schrodinger's cat. This is,
Okay.
this is, yeah, I mean, I think that might just be a wig. And that's the one with the weird painting, the mixed painting.
Yeah.
So it's this kind of a big question that all of this relates to, where I'm not quite sure what to do with this. And then also to reference back to last week, the episode ended with that close-up shot of the poor devil,
Hmm.
what reality did that relate to?
Exactly.
I don't know
Exactly.
that we have indications. And we also have the other cabin scene where Magnus takes Alice to the cabin.
Yes, which I, try to circle that square in my mind is that the same one that we're hearing at the end of episode 5? And it's sort of making me feel like I need a lithium pill to try to figure this all out, you know?
Yeah, well, so I think I wonder how much they're going to clear all this stuff up, and I don't know
Yeah.
that they have to like lay it all out for us. I hope they don't spoon feed us. But you do get in this scene when they visit Skagerrak, and
Hmm.
the title of the episode comes from how Wally says, "Well, we have to go out on the ocean to listen to these ghost tapes. Because 5 miles out, the sound is clearest." And she refers to that as a liminal space,
Right.
which makes some sense conceptually.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the cabin too, we're supposed to think of that
Cabin
way.
can be a liminal space or could be one of those spaces.
It's liminal in the sense that it is between civilization and wilderness,
Yes.
right? So um, that the way that they're shaping everything up, it seems like that is going to be the focal point of whatever resolution we're getting
Yeah.
in these various cabin scenes and thinking about how they hang together or don't.
So I don't know if we use this as a way to transition is we're sort of talking back and forth between two realities of Joe and Alice, but even potentially a third. Are we to, we talked about this a couple episodes ago, are we to believe that with the existence of Henry and Bud, and one of them died apparently on Apollo 18, that there is another, that also is sort of a reference to a third dimension or reality? Because we've clearly got two versions of the same character that are trying to, one of them's trying to intersect the other.
Yeah.
But if one of them died, how do we have two that exist that can communicate with one another?
Well, I mean, again, if you wanted to appeal to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, there would potentially be infinite Henry Calderas.
Right.
Talked about that a bit last week. I want to go back to that. What That's one of the big things I wonder though about what we're seeing in the show.
Yeah.
Um, is it two versions and a third that died in space, and that's all we should meaningfully be thinking about? Or should we be thinking about how, at least in that many worlds interpretation, there would be, infinite Henrys?
Yeah.
Um,
Or are there in both versions of realities that we see, did they both die? Well, they both died, but that somehow both swapped and ended up, in the other's reality. Not to discount what there could be a many worlds theory, but that they both have died, therefore both crossed over into this reality that they find themselves in.
yeah, and I mean, what's really kind of interesting about these scenes in this episode, for the first time, I find myself thinking more that they're in different realities,
Hmm,
which is kind of odd because they're directly interacting.
exactly.
But the fact that they're directly interacting through a mirror and stuff like that, um, and Bud says he's coming for Henry. I'm not entirely sure why he's mad at Henry. I don't know that they filled that in adequately in my mind.
Yeah, I wonder if it's just that he Alice's, no, not Alice, Joe's comment about this guy used to be a drunk and a failure. Now he's not. So I wonder if the drunk and failure one in the other reality sees this Nobel Prize winning, successful, well, moderately successful, still employed version of Henry and wants it to be that.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I guess. Yeah, something like this.
Mhm.
Um, Joe's comment's also weird because it implies that in her native reality, Henry became a failure and an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Yet in the opening episodes of the show, Henry was working at the command center. Um,
Yeah. And that's what'll sort of blow your mind with this is we just don't know who was communicating with whom in what reality at that point.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Just trying to maybe we'll need all 8 episodes to
Yeah.
be able to go back and try to line this stuff up because now I just started thinking off the cuff, oh well, but actually maybe we were seeing a different reality when Henry was in the and how sure am I that he was in the same reality that was in our Joe's reality and all of that.
I'm telling you, just give me the pill. Just give me the lithium pill,
We do get this bit of information that so Bud stopped taking his pills. We saw that. He threw him in the ocean.
Yes.
He's also like trying to go to Thanksgiving with his daughter. I don't know what to do with that. And it apparently also has another sort of maybe daughter named Henrietta.
Yeah, we did see something about Henrietta, and I sort of took that as maybe, Alice and Joe, there's some fractures there because Alice doesn't believe it's her Joe that's there. Buzz now dealing with decades of being in the place with her daughter who doesn't believe that, that's really her dad,
Maybe.
that's completely broken and she doesn't want anything to do with him, no Thanksgiving. Just maybe that's reading too much into it, but it's weird that, he also has a daughter and there's something there between them.
Yeah. What does seem where I was going with this though is it does seem relatively confirmed that the lithium somehow blocks the interaction between the versions of
Yes.
Henry and Bud because Henry's mad at Bud because he stopped taking his pills, and it seems like because he stopped taking his pills, he's able to, make Henry piss his pants and whatever else. That's how it feels.
Yes. So the pills block it in some way, restrict it in some way. And then I also wonder, does the cow open it back up? Or is that why Henry wants the cow, what Joe wants to find out about the cow? Does it sort of, is that the, for lack of a better term, is that the portal between these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are suggestions along those lines. Let's talk about the cow more.
Okay.
When she went and stole it,
Yes.
I don't know, did that feel sufficiently motivated to you? Did it make sense to you that she was like, quick pit stop, gotta steal this cow device?
See, I was trying to think how much clearly she was there when the accident happened, saw that there was some experiment going on. But with all that's been going on with her, does she really have a concept of that's been so important to something else and to Henry and what's going on that she needs to go steal it? I didn't get a sense of she was that deep into the experiment or the understanding of it that she would need to more than just we got to find a way to get Joe and the cow together so some things can start to
Yeah, I mean, I get it plot wise for sure,
yeah.
but in terms of personal motivations, I suppose, she has some thought that, hey, there's some relation between whatever's going on and this cow device. I'm going to go steal it.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, she steals it very easily.
Yeah, where's the security around this thing?
No security whatsoever. I mean, I guess like she'd be allowed to be there because of her job and all of that, but
Yeah.
still,
But I mean they've
um,
apparently got the librarian tasked with like calling the boss whenever somebody asks for a medical record. They're not going to have somebody watching the device that apparently opens up different realities. I mean,
yeah. I
did,
mean, I
did,
guess
did-
only Henry cares about it, though.
yeah,
Like
that's
Irina doesn't think it's anything or
that's
what
true.
have you. I don't know. No, there's no, guy at the door to say like,
Right.
"Hey, what's in your bag there?"
Exactly.
Uh,
And you can just when you go over the ferry, you can just put it under your car seat and no one's going to check for it. That why
yeah,
not? Of
let's
course.
wave our hands and all of that. Wave our hands and all that. What we do discover though is that the Cal device in proximity to these ghost tapes, which we should talk about more actually,
Yeah.
clears them right up, which is interesting. Um, but yeah, so we have to talk about the ghost tapes. They go to Skagerrak. Wally's pretty nice. Lawrence is uh I don't know if he has dementia. Well, his sister says he has dementia.
Yeah. But
He's very
he's
suspicious.
listened to the tapes. Apparently he does not believe this is the Joe that's supposed to be here and calls her a crisis actor.
Yeah, call the cops. She's a crisis actor.
Yep.
I don't know why I'd want to call the cops though, because we also saw Joe reading that article about how these people are not only cranks but criminals.
Exactly.
Which probably tracks insofar as if, the established view of reality is one thing, and they're claiming that they've got these ghost tapes where they hear
Yeah.
another version of what happened in space. Of course, they're going to be discredited.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Um,
thought it, I mean, I think we were right. Not a marine observatory in the true sense of the word. I mean, you have to have some version of this that exists to really send our protagonist on a path of, I've got to figure out what's going on here, why, so those tapes have to exist. But I was struck by Alice in those scenes. Alice really didn't want to be there.
yeah.
Really was saying all the time, let's go, get out, come on, let's go back. When are we going home? Can we leave? It's almost like she, there's something about Alice, I think, that's going to be uncovered. She understands something, senses something. She really did not want to be a part of that.
Yeah, I agree. In particular, she really wanted them to turn off the tapes,
Yeah,
insisting that they're just noise, but she's kind of freaking out about it. And
exactly.
I started wondering if she actually heard things better than what we were hearing, or
Yep.
what exactly was going on there. And
Yep.
it's sort of interesting because then Wally gives, I think, all of the ghost tapes to Joe. But when they're in the car, Alice is, I don't know, very compassionate or what have you, and she ultimately puts a tape in.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. She's the one that almost is like maybe that's what stood out to me. Is she's so combative and aggressive while they're at the observatory and in the car, she becomes sort of compassionate, empathetic, talk to your mom about let's compartmentalize, put things in boxes, let's try to figure things out. So it just, I don't think there was a change in who that Alice was, but it's like she became someone different when she was left that observatory and just with her mother.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think literally.
Yeah.
Maybe just start thinking about that a bit, that maybe Alice's mind is unmoored
Yeah.
between realities and shifting around, even though it's possible, I guess. But I didn't get that sense so much. She's still concerned about the Thalia. I don't know why we're getting that term or name. I mean, it's a proper name. Has
Hmm.
a proper name, it means like strong and healthy or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Which is
Um,
again the opposite of what it is. So, you know, what are we to lean into? How we lean into that? Is that a red herring? Who knows?
Yeah, I didn't find any other reference points. I mean, there's something called Valia algebra, but I don't know that that helps, or maybe I just don't understand it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, could be a reference to that, I suppose. But
Yeah.
when she draws the picture, it would seem to be the same cosmonaut that
Correct.
Joe saw dead in space. Um,
And that we hear on the tapes.
yeah, Alice says that it's a Valia on the tapes because the Valia's been talking to her,
Yeah.
I guess. So there is some notion of Alice having some perception that's cutting across
Yeah.
realities, and they
And
also,
I
oh
really appreciated the last thing that they hear from this brother and sister at the observatory. She makes right before they leave this Alice in Wonderland reference,
yeah,
which is you're going to have to believe six impossible things before breakfast. Sort of setting this on the stage of preparing them and us for there's some really crazy stuff coming that we're going to have to accept when we finally see what's going on here.
yeah, it's a good catch for sure. Alice in Wonderland, which if people haven't read the book, I recommend reading the book. You ever read the
Yeah.
book?
I read the book back when it was referenced to when Lost was on. I reread it
Oh yeah,
then.
and Through the Looking Glass also.
Yeah.
Um, there, Lewis Carroll was a linguist and a logician. His name was like Dodson or something. I have to double
Interesting.
check
Yeah.
that. Lewis Carroll's a pseudonym. So it's just all these games with language. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess maybe it comes across in the animated film version to some degree, but um, yeah, lots of good stuff in there. So if we're now being told that when we think about Alice, we should also
Hmm.
be thinking about Alice from Alice in Wonderland. She going to take us through the Looking Glass? I suppose.
Yeah. Or, you know, as Alice was the key to that story, clearly is Alice the key to ours. And there's something deeper there. I think even just the sense of casting that role as twins, right? I think we
Yeah.
should know that this is twins playing this role. And that's often done when you're dealing with a baby or a toddler, or one of them's fussy and you need to get the other one to step whatever.
Uh-huh.
But for a 11, 12-year old, I think that is going to come into play sometime in the next
I
episode.
keep wondering
Yeah.
whether one of them's playing one version and the other's playing the other
Yeah.
version.
Yeah, I think so.
That consistently. And maybe, I don't know if I could get Michelle McLaren on the phone or something and ask that question, but I wonder, it is interesting that they cast twins here.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it tracks that way or if it doesn't. Um, it did occur to me just now, though, also, Henry and Bud are communicating through a mirror.
Yeah.
There's a looking glass, right?
There's a
There's a
looking glass.
looking
Yeah,
glass. Yeah,
absolutely.
we got
We may have
references.
to go read that over the next couple
I
weeks.
mean, I don't know that I don't know that there's a clue in Alice in Wonderland to find. Circling back to the paintings, I don't know if there's really a clue there either. I just think it's really
Yeah.
interesting that that detail is there, and I'm thinking about how to ultimately interpret that and how to line things up. And I'm really just enjoying how rich this show is, and the
Yeah.
fact that it is making me feel like, oh, I need to go back and rewatch that scene, that
Exactly.
sort of thing.
That's the good stuff right there, just to make those connections and where you can translate or transpose over different episodes and make you wonder about that stuff and not sure where it's going. I can't speculate on that right now. Just, curious to see where the journey ends.
Indeed, right? And that is one in narrative terms. We end this episode with Alice trucking through the snow and she calls
Mhm.
out Mama. Any speculation about how that would make sense? Like what she would be doing and why?
I'm trying to think if I even can understand if that's in a world where she went to the cabin with Magnus or when she went to the cabin with Joe. And I just have no sense of, unless Alice is just lost in this liminal space and something has happened to her that's, caused her to be trapped there. She can't get on one of the two roads, so she's stuck out on the ice, just like Joe did when she was driving there, that she's just trying to get out somewhere.
Yeah, I guess. It's hard to imagine her getting all the way to the cabin on her own,
Yeah,
because I started thinking, oh, maybe this is a version of Alice who's looking for her mother, who's like missing in her reality and out of the cabin calling for
yeah,
mama or something. But that
yeah,
doesn't quite make sense, doesn't quite line up. So I guess we'll just have to see.
yeah. Three more to go.
Got three more to go here, and we'll be back next week talking about episode 6. So I hope everyone joins us. Please do, follow TV Obsessive on social media. Um, subscribe to the YouTube channel on TV Obsessive, and we'll see you next week.